Inverse of 3x is x over 3, and of course the inverse of, if f of x was equal to, for example, 10x, the inverse is going to be x over 10. Let's try another one. What about if you have f of x equals x plus 10? So you might ask, what's the inverse of that? And that is going to be x minus 10. So let's check that. So let's do f of f inverse of x. So what do you get now? So you're putting in f inverse. So you want to put in f inverse, you want to put in x minus 10 into f. But what does f do? It takes whatever you put into it and adds 10 to it. So we're going to take this and add 10 to it. So we're going to take x minus 10 and add 10. What do we get back? We get x. So it is true that this and this are inverses. Okay? Okay, now, so here's a trick for how to get the inverse if you can't figure it out. Like, it's a little bit hard to figure out. Suppose I give you this one, f of x equals 2x plus 8, and I ask you for the inverse. A little bit hard to figure that out. Like, just 10x is okay. We can see that it's going to be x over 10, or just x plus 10, we can see it's going to be x minus 10, but this is a little bit complicated. So it turns out that what you can do, and you might be able to see this, is, so here we started out with this function, 2x plus 8 equals y. To get the inverse, you switch x and y. What do I mean by switch x and y? You write 2y plus 8 equals x. Now, there's no, when we learn algebra, we have like x plus y equals 6, and you want to solve for x, so you would subtract y from both sides. Subtract y from both sides. So you'd end up with like x equals 6 minus y, and so you would have solved. So we always say you're allowed to subtract y from both sides. We have never said, you never say, that you can switch x and y. That is, you have 2x plus 8 equals y. There's no rule that says you can switch x and y, because you can't switch x and y. This is just how to get the inverse. The inverse is not the same as the original function, and you cannot switch x and y, but if you want to get the inverse, you can switch x and y to get the inverse. So that's what I did here. 2x plus 8 equals y, 2y plus 8 equals x. That will give you the inverse. Now, if you want to get the x, you want to write it like y equals something, you have to solve this for y. You're not going to get this back again, because you switched x and y. So if you want to do this, you'd write 2y equals x minus 8, and then you'd write y equals 1/2 x minus 4, right? So that is the inverse. So let's just make sure that that really works, because we already did the work for example, I think we said if we started out with f of x equals x over 10, we found out that the inverse was going to be 10x, right? So let's see if that little trick worked. So we start out with this function. In other words, we start out with y equals that. We start out with y equals x over 10. And the trick was to switch x and y. So if you switch x and y, what do you get? You get x equals y over 10. Now solve for y, and you get what? Y equals 10. Y equals 10x. So that's what we thought. If we start out with x over 10, the inverse was 10x. And that's what we found here. So that's just a little trick to find inverses. You switch x and y and then solve for y. So let's try something. Let's try this. And let's try graphing a function and its inverse.